Now, as we move into the future, we're kind of leaving some of the past behind. And one feature I'm seeing on modern houses, well, it's actually the lack of a feature. And we're talking about eaves on roofs, because with the smaller blocks and with the modern design, with the modern slick minimalistic design, the boxy design, we don't seem to have eaves anymore on roofs. And I was thinking the other day, well, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? How good is the trend towards no eaves? And the question is, why do we have eaves? And can we do without eaves? And after putting a bit of thought into this question, I finally came up with the answer that eaves are really a backup plan. So how do house eaves become a backup plan? Well, I think the history is that eaves were put in to achieve a few purposes, and most of them were really backup plans against just keeping the water out. So it's a backup plan when the first layer of protection fails and you've got something else behind you that will protect you. And I think it's kind of similar to us, our bodies, our energy system. And you can say that the sugar, the carbs, is the first layer, and the fat or the ketones and the fat is the backup plan. Because what happens is that when we need energy, we use the sugar. And when we run out of sugar, the backup plan is the fat that we store. So we consume the fat once we've run out of sugar in our blood system. Now, the problem with our modern style of living is that we have too much sugar available. So we never really have to use our backup plan, which is the fat. And as a result, we build up more and more fat. And then what happens is that the body becomes so reliant on the sugar and the carbohydrates that it just doesn't know how to burn the fat anymore. So the backup plan then fails. And when you take away the backup plan, then you may get bad results. So back to eaves. What did it actually do? So an eaves is a roof overhang past the walls. And what happens is that rain falls on the overhang, and if you have rain that's vertical, the walls are protected. And what is on the walls? You have windows, you have doors, and the flashings at the windows and the doors may not be 100%. So if you've got eaves and it protects you from the weather, that stays dry. So the backup plan of the eaves is the backup plan for the waterproofing of the window and the doors. Now the other thing is, on really sunny days, you need a bit of ventilation and you need a bit of cooling. So what happens is that if you've got eaves, you have shade. So the windows and the doors beneath the eaves don't get a lot of direct sunlight, which means a cooler house. The other thing that happens is that because you've got eaves and the wind blows and it hits the wall, the wind tends to want to go up. And the eaves are ideal place to put vents in, so that when the wind hits the wall and it rises and hits the eaves, it will want to keep rising. And if you've got eaves in there, it can go into your eaves and you can ventilate your attic. So the wind direction comes up through the little vents and goes and cools the attic. If you haven't got eaves, what happens is that the wind hits the wall and goes straight through, and you haven't got that trap to catch the air to send it into your attic to ventilate your attic. So it's a backup plan for attic ventilation. Now the other thing that happens is that you've got a wall and you've got a roof, right? And when you get water leakage through the tiles or through the metal roof, it's quite likely that the sarking layer or the blanket will catch the water, and the water will try to get into your gutter. And what happens is that there is a weak spot between the last batten and your fascia and the gutter. There's a droop in the sarking if there's no anti-ponding board. And what will happen is that there's a chance that the water will sit in just behind the fascia. Now, if you've got eaves, then the water is quite likely to drip onto the eaves, which is an external element to the house. So water that gets onto your eaves don't get into the house. Now, if you eliminate the eaves and you do get a leak, the leak will occur right on the edge of the wall. And in this case, what will happen is that the water will go through probably the cavity, and you're likely to get a problem in your cavity, and it might start to rot the timber framing or rot some other elements without you really knowing. Now, we had an example of this roof leak that we're trying to track down, and this is on a 2-story house. Now, the leak was happening on the ceiling of the first floor, and it was a suspended wall above it. So typically when you've got a suspended wall above a clear space underneath, you've got a beam that holds the wall up. And this particular house had a roof with no eaves. And what happened is that the valley on the roof had blocked up, and the water was overflowing the valley and coming down the cavity of the wall and dripping downstairs. And we just couldn't figure out why it had a leak downstairs. And when we had a good look upstairs on the top roof, we saw that the water from the blockage on the valley was going into the cavity and running down the cavity until it reached the beam that supported the wall, and he had a leak come down the beam. Now, these things happen when you have no eaves. Now, if this house had eaves and the valley was leaking, you would have seen stains on the ceiling of the eaves, and it would have prompted you to go and get it sorted out. But without the eaves, you just don't know that it's the roof that's leaking and not the wall that's leaking. Now, most of you who are in the older homes that do have eaves will think, it's great, my place has got eaves, I don't have to worry. But there's eaves and there are eaves. Now, what do I mean by the eaves and eaves? Well, not all eaves are constructed the same way. Now, if you've got a house with eaves and it's got brickwork, you could side up the brickwork, and on the last course of bricks, you will see the eaves lining hitting the bricks. So if you've got a full course of bricks beneath the eaves lining, then it's likely that you've got a substandard eaves, because how this set of eaves is constructed is that the eaves actually rest on the external brickwork. Now, what happens in this particular style of construction is that if water does get onto the eaves from a leak of the roof, the water will drift along the eaves, and guess what? It's going to end up in the cavity. So you've got the same problem. Water goes into the cavity and it does damage inside the house. Now, if you look up the brickwork and you see that you've got the top course and the eaves lining is actually halfway down the course, this is a much better way of constructing a set of eaves. It is more work, and that's a reason why not all eaves are done this way, because the eaves lining has got no support on the internal edge, unlike the other way where it's resting on the top of the brickwork. It's actually got no support. So what the carpenters have to do is put in additional support so that the eaves lining can butt up to the brick wall, and they have to put a bead underneath it to dress it all up. So there's more work in this style of eaves construction, but it's a better way of constructing your backup plan, because it's no use having a backup plan that is not going to be a real backup plan. So you need a backup plan that actually works. So in the second situation, if you've got a leak, then the water stays beneath the top of the brickwork and never ever goes into your cavity. So if you've got eaves and you've got the properly constructed eaves, then thumbs up, you're safe. Now, for those who've got those modern houses, you've got a small block maybe, or just a modern style of house that's got no eaves, what are the implications? Well, one, you don't have the shading. Two, you don't have the ventilation. 3, you don't have the protection at the windows and the doors against leakage there. In other words, you really don't have a backup plan. So if you've got no eaves, your backup plan's gone. So what do you do when you've got no backup? Well, it means that your first layer of protection has to be super strong. So the flashings at the top of the wall where the roof is, all those flashings have to be 100% so that no water gets back into the cavity. All the flashings around the windows have to be totally 100% waterproof or you get water in. And you've got to make allowances elsewhere for letting air in to ventilate your roof cavity. And if you haven't got natural cooling, well, you put in fans or air conditioning, right? So your first layer of protection is your only layer. So this modern design of no eaves is actually moving us backwards, because having the builders and the tradies who's going to give you 100% on flashings at the walls and the windows and who can cater for ventilation requirements, it's quite rare. It's going to be designed from the architect onwards, and everyone has to embrace the idea that the fallback plan is now gone and you're relying on the first layer as full protection. Versus eaves where there's a secondary protection, there's a backup. So if something goes wrong or something's not quite right, you've got a backup plan.